And now, the Lowe Post.
Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast live from Los Angeles, California in the Jalen and Jacoby studio, where I could not be more thrilled to be joined by Hall of Famer, legend from the Boston Globe, from ESPN and everywhere and all over the world, Jackie MacMullan. How are you?
I wish my last name was Lowe. I'd like to be the Lowe Post podcast.
No, MacMullan is an awesome name.
Yeah, but Lowe for this purpose. It's a good one. All right. Anyway.
But when my dad used to joke that he wanted to name me Hal so that people would say hello when they called my name. And then,
Oh, don't you? So my married name is Boyle. So when we had a son, they're like, you're going to call him Lance, right? Lance Boyle.
Okay.
So,
yeah. Some people called me Zach High. Like, because the opposite is very funny.
That is
very
pretty
clever.
good. That is clever.
It's not that clever. How are you?
I'm good. It's nice to see you.
We
Thanks
were
for
on
having
TV
me.
today. How do you think it went? Great RTV performance.
How did our TV performance go? I thought we were okay.
Do you think we carried Rachel? I think we kind of carried Rachel.
I don't think we ever carried Rachel.
To be clear, I was joking. We did not have to carry Rachel.
We were not. We never. I thought her monologue was excellent.
She's
such a good writer. People don't realize, they say, "Oh, TV," but she writes. She writes a column every day and then says it on television.
People that generally don't realize, and I would even put myself in this until I started doing a very baby version of it, how talented on-air people are. Like, if you look at I think it was Ryan Russillo once posted a poll on Twitter. How many of you think I could do my job? You could do my job as well as I do. And it was like 55% yes and 45% like, you have no idea how hard it is. Like, people like Ryan, the name that popped into my head is like Ryan Seacrest. Ryan Seacrest, now there's some bad stuff that's come out about it. I'm just saying, to be able to be that good on air all the time and every different, that's just crazy talent.
And to be able to speak clearly without ever faltering on one word, that's what always amazes me, because I'm still a print journalist at heart
That's right.
blabbers on occasionally.
Print journalists at heart. We just had a whole lunch talking about the state
Some
of
good
journalism.
sushi. Some good sushi we had.
Speaking of print journalism, every time I have you on, which is not frequent, but that's good, I like to talk about all of your stories feel like events. And that's not just because of the timing of it. It's because when you write, the world stops. The NBA world stops to read what you've written. And your most recent one, so we were at the Sloan conference together, and we were in the room for the panelists and stuff, and I thought, look over, wow, there's Jackie sitting there talking to Chris Bosh. That seems interesting. I wonder what that's about. What it was about was you got Chris to open up about sort of his desire to try to play again, but I thought more interesting than that, his emotional response to not being able to play. So did you already know when you got to Sloan, like, we're already doing that interview, it's already booked, or it was just literally
No.
he's there, let's try?
So I was moderating a panel with Chris. It was called Put a Ring on It. So it was a cast of thousands. There wasn't enough room on the stage for anybody else. There was about two people too many on that stage. And it was interesting because Mitch Kupchak, who was up for the Charlotte job, was on that panel. Sue Bird, who I always find endlessly fascinating. And Chris Bosh. Well, I won't bore everybody with all the details, but Chris Bosh was on that panel. And I hadn't seen Chris for a while. And the last time I saw him, I think I shared it with you, I saw him in a restaurant, a swanky restaurant in Los Angeles where I did not belong. But I was there by chance with others. And I had talked to him about, in that setting, it was such a social setting. At that point, Chris wasn't playing and hadn't played for a while. And I'm pretty sure the Heat had already bought him out. And I went over and said hello. He was with his wife, who was just lovely, Adrienne. And at that point in the restaurant, I said to him, hey, I know this is difficult for you. I'm really sorry. It's horrible. And I said, I think I read somewhere that you may, try to play again. I said, you didn't ask me. This is unsolicited. But I was there when Reggie Lewis went through something like this, when he went shopping for an answer that he wanted to hear, and the result was just devastating. I said we should be sitting around saying that what a shame Reggie Lewis retired and has a defibrillator in his chest. We should not be saying what a shame Reggie Lewis died and left two very, very small children without a father. And he said, I really appreciate that. And I later on I thought, what are you doing? You're out to dinner. That's so heavy-handed. But it was on my mind. It was on my mind, and I wasn't being a journalist at that time. I was just being a person and just recounting something. So when I saw him again at Sloan, I kind of apologized to him. I just said, hey, I've been thinking a lot about that evening, and it wasn't the right place or the right time, and I apologize for that. And he said, no, I took what you said into account. I've thought about it. And he said, but you don't understand it. It's not easy. It's not easy to just, something you've done your whole life, to just turn the switch and shut it off. And so that's sort of how it began.
And then you just said, well, that would make for an interesting, like, if you're willing to talk about this.
I said, how hard has it been? He said, I said, you know, it's been a while. And he said, yeah, I found it very difficult. And I said, well, what has it felt like? And he said, boy, I haven't even been able to talk about this for 2 years. So it was clear to me that it's been pretty difficult. And the response from that story was interesting to me, in that a lot of people apparently were very angry, like, he has no right to feel this way. He has no right to lament this lifestyle. I mean, people meaning
anonymous people on Twitter?
Yeah,
people?
And stuff like that. I guess, readers and people responding that way because, these spoiled athletes, he's so spoiled. And I thought, wow, you really missed the point of this. And the point was to show you that these are people just like us who struggle. And when the lights go off, it's incredible how dark it gets very quickly for a lot of these guys. And Chris Bosh, of course, his example is very dramatic because he had to stop in his tracks in the peak of his career. But you've covered, and I've covered, many other pro athletes who knew it was coming, and it was still incredibly difficult.
I can't believe anyone responded to the piece that way. I didn't even. Well, that didn't even cross my mind.
Well, no, because again, you read it the way I would hope most people would.
It was actually. It was interesting to me how open he was about. Like, I think he used the phrase, I feel forgotten.
Forgotten. Yeah, it was hard to hear, wasn't it?
Yeah. What was it? It was hard for you to hear, too?
It was. And it's just the idea that, and it's so true, anyone that's been on a team knows this, when you're on a team and the 12 or 14 or 17 of you are in this room and you're sharing things, the good and the bad, nobody else really matters outside that little enclave. And when someone gets hurt, even if they're part of that enclave and they're all of a sudden not anymore. It's really odd, and it's true. A lot of the players that I remember just retiring later on in life, many of them didn't need to work again because they had all the money they needed. But it wasn't the money that they missed. It was just being part of something and being part of a team, because there's no greater thing, I would argue, than being part of a team.
But it was interesting just how he also just thought about, like, he was open about it, and I could see readers rolling their eyes at this, but sure. I didn't take it that way. But I could see people doing it. He was like, he essentially said, I was famous. Mm-hmm. People wanted a piece of me everywhere I went. People want my time. People want my money. People want to just be seen with me. They want to be in photos with me. And he was very, like, pretty bald about, like, I missed that. Like, I missed the sort of, like, there was, like, a sort of an ego boost that he was pretty open about that. I thought that was interesting.
Right. He's, that was the thing. He was so astonishingly candid about all of it. And I thought the part that was particularly heartbreaking for me was just the idea that, when I said to him, well, what about your ex-teammates? Do you hear from them? And he said, they tried.
Well, isn't that what happens in life all the time? So that really struck me, because he has these parts of the story. He says, we kept in touch for a while, and then the season starts, and they're just in the season. And haven't we all had the thing where a coworker leaves to go to another company? Back when we actually worked in offices and saw people every day.
Exactly.
And we have the goodbye drinks, and hey, we're gonna have lunch, and we're gonna, like, we'll invite you to the happy hour. And then, like, the first time you have the company happy hour, he comes, and the second time you invite him, but he doesn't come, and then it's like over.
It's over.
And then like 5 years go by, you never see this person again.
That's right. And the interesting part again was that him sensing that some of these players, that when he did see them, maybe it was at Prime 112, or maybe it was at a game or an event, that when they did see him, they almost shied away from him because he was this stark reminder of what they hope absolutely never happens to them. That to me was pretty sad too.
It was also interesting how he talked about, I can see why athletes go broke. And when we think about athletes and money problems, it has been very well documented. Boston's Antoine Walker may be the most famous example recently.
Right.
We think of their spending habits during their career, or we think of their inability to, back when maybe they didn't make enough money to be sustainable for generations, their inability to get a good line of work.
Right, or an agent that duped them a lot of times.
Chris is talking about, he was talking about, like, chasing that feeling of being wanted and being in Prime 112 and being in the best places with the most famous people. He was talking about how, like, you could tell he, like, spending money to chase that. That was interesting.
He's because he's a really thoughtful, intelligent guy. And I think that's why the story resonated with so many people, because he did give us insight that perhaps none of us would ever really consider.
Is there anything, I mean, you called all these GMs, I'm sure you called the league and the Players Association, like, I've been told there's almost no hope. Like that
I've been told there's no hope.
The book is closed.
Yeah,
on
I mean
Chris
it is,
Bosh.
and it's because it's too dangerous. It's too scary. And I had a colleague of mine play devil's advocate with me, and he was like, "Well, what if he just played home games and then he didn't travel, because traveling, of course, is where the blood clots." And I said, yeah, but that means you have to be 100% sure that's the only way he's going to get a blood clot. And from what I've been told, and of course the records are sealed, and his because of HIPAA laws and because of all his medical records from the Heat have not been seen by other NBA teams, at least that I'm aware of. I should say that because perhaps maybe someone asked and the Heat obliged. I'm not sure. I didn't get that sense, but that I suppose it's possible. But we don't really know what else is involved with this. And I get the sense from talking from GMs around the league that there's other things in play here, and I don't know what they are.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I hope that Chris Bosh doesn't try to play again. I hope there isn't some renegade league in Slovenia or somewhere that signs him up and
he won't do that anyway.
Sign away. I hope not. I hope not, because he's had a great career, and it ended too soon. There's no question. That was interesting too, talking about the longevity numbers. That's what players do. And
that's right. He talked about how my net, what is it, 20, 25, and 20 and 10, 20,000 and 10,000 or something like that, whatever it was.
And so he had a great career that got cut short. That's what people. I don't know. Is he a Hall of Famer?
Oh, for sure.
I think so. Right?
100%.
I told him that day. I said, I think you're in. I don't think you have to worry about that. But
what did he say?
He didn't say anything.
Does he think he may not get in?
No, I think he thinks he's a Hall of Famer, but I think that he's a Hall of Famer that didn't get to play as long as he wanted to. And, welcome to a long line of guys just like you whose careers like that end. And the real interesting thing to me is he didn't know, and most NBA players don't know when they've played their last game. Think about it, really.
That's
now,
true.
if you're Kobe Bryant, you get to choose. But if you're a journeyman,
choose and score 60,
right? If you're Steve Blake, you don't want it to be your last game, but then all of a sudden one day,
a great piece about.
Well, that what makes me think about it. So, like, all of a sudden one day the phone doesn't ring, and all of a sudden your career's over, and you're like, whoa, what happened?
You know what the most just incredible, like, if you told me this 5 years ago, example of that is right now?
Who's that?
Darren Williams.
Yeah,
it's just
Darren
over.
Williams. It
like
is.
He's just out of the NBA.
Yeah,
like Derrick Rose is still in the NBA.
Right.
And
by all accounts, Darren Williams is really happy that he's out of the NBA. So maybe sometimes it's just not the right thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, that just happened.
It did.
Like that.
It really did.
mean, and he's just, like, you look at some of the guys who are playing backup point guard, it's like Darren Williams is better than those guys. Like, he's just out. And part of it is that it's hard to go from X-time All-Star Darren Williams to, like, maybe I'm better than Mario Chalmers Darren Williams.
Well, and that's what Derrick Rose has done, and we've seen how hard it's been for him. He's left for extended periods of time. It is just difficult to be immortal. These players are invincible, and then all of a sudden they're not. And I've watched it time and time again, and you have to be really something special to get through it without struggling a little bit.
And Bosh, it was heartbreaking is a little strong, but it was wistful to hear him talk about, man, all this small ball stretch centers, like, that's me. Like, this is my league right now, and I can't play.
I always wonder, like, what guys like Jack Sikma are thinking.
Yeah,
So no, I thought that was really a poignant moment, because he would be perfect for. I mean, if he were healthy, that's the thing. Every team would want him. Think about it.
Yeah. No, there's no. I mean, at what he's going to cost because of the uncertainty and how long he's been out. I mean, It would be a no-brainer.
It would be.
So, so when you write a deep story where a player is very revealing to you, and did he call you afterwards and say, "Oh, I wish you hadn't put that quote," or "I love the story"? Do you ever get feedback?
I do. Sometimes I didn't in the case of Chris. In fact, in the case of Chris, I said to him, I always, if they're willing, say, "Can you give me a number in case something comes up or I have additional questions?" And I did have additional questions for him about his business. He had started a business some years ago, a coding business. He's got a great technology background. And he's like, "Oh yeah, just text me with any questions." But in that moment, he shared what he shared, and then he didn't get back to me. So I haven't heard from him. Sometimes you do, sometimes it's amazing. Sometimes they're mad. Sometimes they're like,
who's been the most angry, or just most memorable couple of players that come to mind as you?
Well, so this is a dumb one, and it's a long, long, long time ago. But do you remember a guy named Eric Williams? He played for the Celtics.
Of course, number 55 from Providence.
There you go. And he played at Providence College. And he grew up in a really bad part of Jersey. And I sat down with him. I really liked Eric a lot. We got along well. And I started interviewing from this story, and he started telling me all these things about his childhood, about him stealing, about him, making some really bad decisions, the culture from which he grew up in. And he gave me names of a couple of guys, and I tracked some of them down, and I wrote this story. I was working at the Boston Globe then. I was pretty young. And so I was covering the team on a day-to-day basis. So the story ran, and before the game, someone gave it to him in the locker room, and he was crying.
Really?
And And Bill Bondswitz, remember Bill Bondswitz? You might be too young for that. Yeah. He used to be a PR guy with the Sixers and then very briefly with the Celtics. Good guy, really good guy. And I think he ended up going into football PR. But anyway, he grabbed me and he said, "Oh my God, he's in there crying." I was like, "Oh no," because I didn't know if that was good or bad. It turned out it was good, but he had never. Sometimes these guys, they put their head down and they live these lives that they live, and then all of a sudden, if one of us writes about them, they all of a sudden look up and actually read what they've done or what they've been through. And I think sometimes it's pretty shocking to them, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had that experience.
I'm trying to think who was players that have been mad or happy or...
Well, so like I did the Chris Paul, the Harden cover story.
Which we will talk about.
We could talk about that a little bit, but... I think Harden really loved it, but I guess Chris wasn't as happy because...
Why?
Well, there was a little back and forth with Chris and Doc in that story.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that. We might as well do it now. There was a little back and forth.
There was, and Doc is someone that I've covered for many years, have great respect for. I covered him all the way back as a player.
Sure.
And he was someone that's always been great to me. And I said to him, "You're not going to like this story." And I told him ahead of time, and I asked him the questions I had to ask. And I said to Chris, "You're not going to like this part of the story." I did it, I did it as honestly and as upfront as I could, but I knew neither one of them were going to be particularly happy with what the other one said.
Hey everyone, in the NBA, sleep is a hot topic. How much sleep do players get? How much do they need? How can we change our travel schedules to get more sleep? Sleep is the bedrock of being productive and healthy. You need a lot of hours of sleep. Some of us don't get enough. And getting a great night's sleep, people buy expensive mattresses. They have all these sound machines. They have all these tricks. But you know how good it feels to just curl up with a nice, fresh, new pair of sheets? Well, you can do that and feel like you're curling up with luxury sheets, but without the price if you use Boll and Branch. Everything Boll and Branch, from bedding to blankets, everything they make is from 100% pure organic cotton, which means they start soft and they somehow get even softer over time. You buy them directly from Boll and Branch, so you're paying wholesale prices. There are luxury sheets out there that cost like $1,000 apparently. I mean, I would never buy that, but you can get the same feel from Boll and Branch for only a couple $100. They've been written up in Forbes, the Wall Street Journal. 3 U.S. presidents have apparently chosen Boll and Branch sheets. Shipping is free, and you can try them for 30 nights. If you don't love the sheets, you send them back. You get a full refund, no harm, no foul. But the company very much doubts that you will want to send them back. To get started right now, my listeners get $50 off your first set of sheets at Boll and Branch. If you go to bollandbranch.com, promo code LOWE. Again, enter promo code LOWE, L-O-W. That's my last name, the name of this podcast. It's B-O-L-L and branch.com, promo code LOWE, $50 off your first set of sheets. Part of that story is this came out in October right before the season started.
A while ago.
In the magazine and also online. You can go read it if you haven't yet. Probably everyone listening to this has read it. You framed it as, well, here are these two guys who have had playoff heartbreaks coming together, and you can't tell that without getting into some of the heartbreaking parts of their heartbreaks. And
right. And Doc said something in that story that just was astonishing to me. He said, was asking about Chris. Everybody knew they had friction at the end, and it's hard for a point guard coach and a point guard player, I think, especially Doc. Yeah. Doc's hard on his point guards. He was hard on Rondo too, but they've come out the other end of that relationship just fine. Now at the end, when Doc left first, when Doc left, it wasn't good at all. But they're fine now. I mean, I just saw them at Paul Pierce's retirement.
Time and the lack of proximity.
Right, and I don't know if that's going to be the same thing with Chris Paul and Doc, because they had the heartbreak. They didn't get the championship like Rondo and Doc did, so maybe that won't be the same. But, in talking with Doc about Chris and, the idea of the second round, and he said something about the idea of, well, if you want to be tough on guys, and we know historically that Chris he's tough on his teammates because he's a perfectionist. Doc said something and I'm paraphrasing, to the effect of, well, you better be willing to take some of the criticism yourself.
I've got it written right here.
Okay, so
because I had it on my laptop and I forgot my freaking laptop charger, so it's in my hotel room.
Right.
But it's something like, when you mess up, you got to take it.
Right.
And I don't think Chris was ever very good at that.
Right.
And when I read that at the time, I thought, the wording isn't explosive, but the message is like, that's explosive. That's basically saying like, you can dish out, but you can't take it.
You can't take it, right? And I think, Doc, if you think of the timing of that, still pretty wounded, right?
Sure.
They thought they were going to get Chris back. He was, the famous story that he was texting Chris lineups all before.
I don't think I know that story.
Oh, yeah. He was texting Chris Paul lineups, before just the potential lineups for next year as free agency was approaching. And, Chris Paul was looking at him and, not so much.
What were the new lineups going to be? Chris, Blake, JJ, DJ, and whoever again?
I have a feeling Austin Rivers was in probably.
Rotating cast of anonymous bad small
and maybe
forwards.
They were talking about potential free agents they could bring in too. I don't know the lineups. I just know that this was happening. So there's some hurt on both sides there. But
Chris and Bob Iger were sipping wine and debating free agency.
Wasn't that something?
It was unbelievable. The fact that these guys all run in the same circles is just unbelievable.
Crazy. Well, wasn't Jay-Z involved too? I think Jay-Z was involved.
The story that I was told, and I didn't put it in my story, is so like Chris is traded to the Rockets.
Right.
And then
traded in quotations.
And then they go, Tad Brown, who's the CEO of the Rockets.
Great guy.
And great guy. And not Daryl.
It was Mike D'Antoni.
Go to dinner at Mastro's, right?
Mastro's, yeah, that's Mike D'Antoni.
So Tad told me when I was in Houston, I was asking him for interesting details. He was like, Chris told us at that dinner that he and his wife were going to go over to Beyonce and Jay-Z's house afterwards because that's just what they do. They just hang out with Beyonce and Jay-Z. And I think he said we had Chris Paul Houston jerseys made already and in every variety that we were going to use this season because they wanted to give them as gifts to Beyonce and Jay-Z and their family.
Wow.
And I was like, man, it's
yes, it is.
Quite a sequence of events for Chris Paul.
Isn't it crazy? But, the funny thing I think about is from that story that I thought was so interesting was Daryl, of course, was chasing Chris Paul his entire career, all the way back to when he was in the Celtics front office working for Danny Ainge. They tried desperately to trade for the rights to draft Chris Paul and trade Paul Pierce all the way back.
I was going to ask you about, that's on my list of questions. How close did you think that, Chris Paul is drafted, 04 or 05?
I'm never good at the dates, but
again, I don't have my laptop.
Right,
it's one of those 2 years. How close do you think that really was?
Well, if the Celtics could have done it, they would have.
Right.
And I'll tell you, this is how close it was. I worked at the Boston Globe then. There were 2 ads set to run in the morning editions of the Boston Globe. One was follow the Celtics with Paul Pierce and, going forward. And the other one was a new era beginning and a picture of Chris Paul. They had 2 ads ready to go.
Is that ad exists somewhere then?
It
like
does.
Our Celtics caricatures.
I wish it did, but it's kind of like the 1985 Celtics NBA championship banner that I have, which of course never happened. They didn't win.
No, did not win that one.
Right.
So Chris is upset or Chris is perturbed that Doc is saying that, but
I think so. But I think he also, I liked his answer. Well, the other thing Doc said was, well, everybody always thinks the grass is greener, and Chris's response I thought was amazing. I was like, well, I'm just going to go around the corner and see. Pretty good answer. And they're both, they're both going to be fine because Doc, I think it's been another tumultuous year for them. Injuries.
I'll bet you, though, I haven't talked to Doc in a while. I'll bet you he's having a ball. Because there's nothing a coach likes better than low expectations and gritty, overachieving players.
And he's done a really great job with them the last couple of months. I did wonder, trading Blake after they signed that deal and put when they were recruiting Blake and had the thing, I wonder how that played out. But Chris is in a unique position. I don't know about you, but I'm convinced they can win. I'm convinced. I'm not saying they're going to, but I don't have the reservations that some of these other people do about whether this is going to work in the playoffs, what the Rockets are doing. I think it will.
No, I think it's going to work in the playoffs. I just think the only thing going against them is that a healthy Golden State team is an all-time team.
Right, and right now, Golden State is not that healthy.
No, and it's hard to know because, Steph's going to miss a few games and probably is going to miss more games than he really has to, because who cares?
Of course,
and
I would do that.
Same thing with Clay.
Right.
Andre is just tell me when it's May 10th or something, and I'll start playing like Andre again.
Right.
And McCall, whatever. Jordan Bell, potentially important player.
Sure.
We don't know, but like, if they go into the playoffs and they're each 95%. Maybe that increases the chances that someone gets hurt to 15% or 20%. And Steph,
That's right.
I believe Steph has had 4 ankle flare-ups in the last 3 months.
Yeah, they're starting to add up, aren't they?
Well, it's just like it's all it takes is that we said it on the show today. All it takes is like, he's out a couple games here and there each one. Who cares? Well, if it's the wrong couple games, if it's games 3 and 4 in Houston, like you got a problem all of a sudden.
Sure you do. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And Houston's been remarkably healthy, except for Chris. You always have to say except for Chris. Chris is, because of the way he plays, you're always going to be susceptible to injury with him. And I thought, no one believed me when I wrote that story and talked about how D'Antoni was going to, shuffle the minutes, stagger the minutes, and have them only together. No one believed me, but they've really stuck pretty closely to it, and I think it's helped both players. I think they're both
honestly,
fresher.
like, we people in my position tend to just like, why isn't Scotty Brooks staggering Brad Beal and John Wall, or why isn't Scotty Brooks staggering KD and Russ?
Right.
But like sometimes they try, and like these players, and Steve Kerr has talked about this because he's juggled, he's rejiggered KD and Steph's minutes patterns a couple of times. These guys, KD really likes to play the whole first quarter.
Yeah.
Like he's just used to it.
And
That's
was
the
Harden.
way it is.
Harden. See, this is the thing. Harden gave that up. Harden was one of those guys too.
That's in your story, and you have Mike quoted as saying, and it's something like, I'm going to have to say, hey, remember, tough. We agreed.
We did. We talked about this. So, and that's why I think that's the other reason why I like Houston's chances. They remind me a little bit of that, just from the hunger standpoint of the Celtics team in 2008 that won it all, because they all came and they hadn't won, and people were saying, no, they're never going to win, and it's Garnett and it's Pierce and it's Allen, and they were just hungrier than everybody else all year long. And it got to the point where, especially at home, you just thought they were never going to lose.
Yeah.
Do you remember all the playoff series were really close that year?
Yeah,
but they were never going to lose at home.
I remember,
they did. They lost one home game to the Pistons. Funny thing.
Did they lose?
They did. They lost one home game to the Pistons.
One of the first two, I guess.
Right, but it didn't matter.
Yeah, then they rolled them.
Right. But so that idea of being hungry, I know it's cliche sometimes, but in the case of Harden and Paul and D'Antoni, those three together, there's just so much riding on their legacy, and that's a heavy word, but even just their reputation or just their own satisfaction. I think they're all willing to give up whatever they need to do. Just get me there. Just get me. Let me just be able to grab hold of that ring, and then if we can't hang on to it, oh well, but just let me get there.
Did a lot of reporting in Houston. I did too, but probably not as deeply as you. I didn't get any time one-on-one with James. What do you think actually happened in Game 6 against the Spurs? Do you buy that it was just fatigue? He was just tired? Because if you talk to people on the team, they will say, now we're talking in hindsight, but they will say, like, one of their coaches told me, though, like, it was Game 1 or Game 2 against the Spurs. There was some stretch in the game where we started to look at each other and say, uh-oh. Mm-hmm. It looks like what we feared is happening. He's getting tired. But then he put up big. Do you think he just got tired?
I think he got tired, and I think he got frustrated, and I think it's a bad combination. And I think what happened was they got deep, and he looked around and he thought, I can't do this all by myself. Can someone at least just get open and take the ball up the court for just 30 seconds? Just give me 30 seconds off, not from scoring, just literally taking the ball up. And I think once he realized that wasn't going to happen, it became a self-defeating mechanism. I really believe that.
So maybe that is a more polite way of saying, like, and let me be very clear about this. This is not me talking. What I'm going to say is there are people in the league, people in the league who think he quit. Who think the going got tough and he quit.
I don't think he quit.
I don't think he quit either. But I'm saying that sentiment is out there, and what you just verbalized is a much milder version of just the adversity became too much.
Right, and he just was looking for some help, and I don't think he could find it. And I think part of that's fatigue.
He's a very physical player.
He is, and he was exhausted. He told me that. He said I was exhausted, and I think I think also you cannot possibly measure the emotional toll of the postseason. It's times 20. So whatever he was doing during the regular season, now you have to multiply it times 20 for everybody.
And the first round is Harden, Russ, Russ.
But whatever you're already doing, like he was already doing too much. We knew that. We knew it all along, right? We knew all along he was doing too much. They worried about it. They fretted about it. Now you add the emotional toll of the postseason, and I think it became too much. But I also think, too, there was a level of frustration that he could have maybe fought off that he didn't do as well. So I guess I don't call that quitting. I think that's a little too harsh.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
And you, as you said in your story, lots of players, all-time great players, have had moments like this, which reminds me, I think this was your first year at least being part of the Celtics coverage. Were you at the tragic Johnson game?
I was, but as a fan.
As a fan, okay.
I didn't make the cut, the long globe cut. I was very sad. And I think they felt bad enough for me that they got me a ticket.
What game of the series was that?
When he dribbled out the clock.
He dribbled out the clock, yeah.
Game. See, I'm not good with
4,
this.
maybe?
This is where you need Bob Ryan because he remembers all this stuff like yesterday.
So you were at that. You were at that game.
Yeah,
where were you sitting in that game?
They weren't great seats. I was up on the nosebleeds.
I never went to the Old Garden. Never saw a game in the Old Garden.
Oh, you didn't?
I
It was
saw
wonderful. I mean, I
TD,
spent half
TD,
my young life
it is.
there, you know. And as much as I thought this place is a pit and it has asbestos and this is how we're all gonna die someday and the rats are going all around. There was just a feeling about it, especially because they had the balconies, the overhang.
Yeah.
Those were the best seats in the place. I only got to sit there once. I got to sit right next to Bob Cousy while he was doing the game from the overhang there.
Wow.
And it was just an amazing experience. And there were bad seats all over the place. But I remember when the new Garden opened, because for a long time that's all we could
Fleet Center.
Or the Fleet Center, right? Very good. And we'd get in there, and I was like, "This is the damn Hartford Civic Center. This is awful.
It was awful.
This is
It's
terrible."
awful.
But part of it was just because the basketball wasn't that good either.
That is true. It was a long, dark
And then all of a sudden, that game, you know, when they're playing New Jersey and Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker have that thrilling comeback, and my son was like 6, and everybody was screaming so loud he had his hand over his ears.
Then
Now,
back.
I was covering that game. My husband was up in the stands with the kids, but so. The building just is as good as the team. That's always the case.
What's the best game you ever saw? Like, what's the most compelling basketball game you've ever seen?
You know what? It was a Michael Jordan hit that jumper over Craig Elo. I was there.
Wow, that's the one. Game 5 against Cleveland.
That just really, because I thought he jumped so high. We used to sit courtside, like literally.
Yeah.
I was right there, and I'm watching him. I'm like, that's going. Like, you knew. I'm like, that's going in, and it went in, and then he leapt in the air, and it was like, and Craig Elo was just like so devastated. He's such a great guy and a good player, very good player.
Did he not make a layup right before that to put them up 1?
So that to me was like, I was like, wow, I think I've just seen something really incredible. That one comes to mind right off the top.
That was. I remember exactly where I was when that game happened. I was at my house watching it, but I remember exactly where I was.
But I mean, I've seen.
And
a
how
ton
many
of games.
times have we all tried to imitate the sideways kind of fist pump?
You're gonna throw your shoulder out.
Yeah, no, really, it does look violent.
He made everything look easy. Jordan was really interesting to cover. He was. It's so long ago now, but the world was so different then, Zach, because you'd go in to the locker room and you could talk to him and nobody else would be there. You know, I remember one day doing an off day story.
Michael Jordan?
Nobody there. I mean, it's an off day. They used to practice in the Deerfield, like, athletic center or something. It was in like a strip mall in Deerfield, Illinois. And it was an off day during the playoffs. I'm not making this up. And there wasn't a Chicago writer there. It was like a Saturday. There was no Chicago writer there. And I was there with a couple other Celtics writers, and they would practice in the court. And then there was like right there in front of everybody, you could lift. It was Nautilus. Remember Nautilus?
Oh, yeah.
It was like a Nautilus machine. And he was there, and I was like, well, I'm going to go talk to the dude, you know? And I just would go over and sit down with him. That's how I got to know Michael Jordan. By the end, of course, I couldn't get near him, you know? In fact...
So this must have been 86, right? If the Celtics writers are there, it must be Celtics.
No, it was 85, I think.
85.
I think it was 85, his rookie year. When Bird said that's God. Wasn't that 85 or was that 86?
I think that's 86 where he
I'm bad
scores
with numbers.
60-some
Yeah, because then he broke his foot the next year. But the very end of his career, when he was in Washington, I went down there unannounced because that was the only way, and I showed up, and the PR people were like, "Well, he's not going to talk to me." I go, "Yeah, he is," because
that I like.
No, because he knew. He laughed when he saw me, you know, and I said, "Come on, this is it." But the other thing I did was I went down to Birmingham. So when he was playing AA baseball, I went down to Birmingham. I was working at the Globe, and his manager was, you probably know this, Terry Francona.
Yes.
So I went down, and I had never met Terry, and that became a lifelong relationship for me because that was like, talk about nobody around, you know? So I was in the dugout, and he was coming out. I was sitting in the dugout, and he saw me, and he started laughing. He goes, "Can you believe that?" And it was the day after Scottie Pippen wouldn't go into the game because Phil drew up the last shot for Tony Kukoc. I'll never forget it.
And it was such the Bulls post MJ were such a great story of still winning 54 games and still getting as far as they did. And like, I mean, to listen to, you read the stories about that game, you know, Cartwright confronting Scottie in the locker room, saying, "How could you? How could you do this to us?"
But you know what? In fairness to Scottie Pippen, if you're Phil, there's just a better way to do it. You know, I think there's a better way to do it. And I'm not sure you did the right thing if you're Phil either. I know Kukoc hit the shot.
Sure.
I still don't think you did the right thing. There's just a better way to do it. So I think Scottie's taken a lot of grief for that, and I think once in a while someone should speak up for him.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Fair.
Because, you know, I understand the optics of it. And you know what happened afterwards, and he's so lucky it didn't happen during a time of social media. My God, he'd be crucified. He'd probably never recover from it. Actually,
I got to talk to Kukoc for the story I wrote about Drazen Petrovic, and it's funny because I reached out to the Bulls.
He was a really good player.
I don't have Tony's number, you know, and they said, you know, Tony can be hard to get, no guarantee. And of course, as soon as they told him what it was about, I got his cell phone. How much time needed? You want to talk about Drazen? 2 hours,
forever.
1 hour?
Yeah. They're all like that. Dino, Raja, all those guys feel the same way.
I talked to Raja is, I've never met Dino. You've met Dino probably a million times.
He used to call me in the middle of the night.
About
nothing.
Life?
I think he'd be back in Croatia and he'd be sipping on God knows what, and he'd get a little tipsy and he'd call me up and forget the time change, or, you know. I always liked Dino a lot.
Well, it's funny. He
was a
was
really good player.
Great player. Of all the old Croatian or Yugoslavian heads I talked to for that story, he was the one who sounded like an 80-year-old man. Like he's like, these kids today, they have no idea. They're lazy. They don't know how to work. They don't know who Drazen is. They know YouTube clips. I'm like, man, this guy is aged.
But you know what? Dino wasn't exactly the most fit work. Chain smoked.
Yeah, he smoked, right?
But by the way, that list is longer than people think, too.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'll have to go to my grave telling you some of the NBA Hall of Famers that smoked. Well, I mean, everybody knows all the Celtics smoked in the 60s, right?
Yes.
We know that. In fact, Seth Sanders always tells the story where he joins the team and he's like, how can these guys be running up and down the floor? They all smoke. So he started smoking because that's what you did. But even the modern day players, like as recently as 10, 15 years ago, a lot of them smoked too.
And now nobody smokes.
I hope not.
Remember when the smoking ban was like controversial?
Oh,
when cities started banning smoking. It was like controversial. And I remember, like, I was in graduate school at William and Mary in Virginia in 2001, 2002, and there was a bar. There was like the grad student bar, the Greenleaf, which I think closed. It was a great bar. Boy, I spent a lot of bad nights at the Greenleaf, and everyone smoked. It was like 2002, 2000.
Did you smoke?
No, never smoked.
Right.
I smoked. I took one drag of a cigarette, because I was promised in exchange that I would get information about a girl that I was like completely in love with.
And did it work out?
And the information was like I was going to be a hero for bringing this information to her. It wasn't like bad for her. It was like, and this was going to be and it did not work out for me. But I took a drag.
The information was she really hates people who smoke.
I don't know. It didn't work out for me.
So I was not a smoker either, but my older sister once in a while smoked. She's since passed away, but she loved to smoke. Now and again, when she had a drink or two. I remember one night we went to the Fenway Park, my two sisters and myself and our boyfriends, and my sister and my younger sister and I married the guys we were with. And my older sister said, "Psst, come here." I'm like, "Karen, what are you doing?" She was hiding behind a school bus. She's like, "Come here, have a drag." So I took a drag of her stupid cigarette.
And that was it?
That was pretty much. Yeah, I was never really a smoker. But a lot of those guys, I remember when I went to China, Yao Ming's rookie year, I went to Shanghai for the opening of the Shanghai Sharks season now that he was playing for the Houston Rockets. Everybody in there was smoking. In fact, it was December. They were smoking so much that they had all the doors open to let all the smoke out, and it was freezing cold, and players were wearing winter sport parkas on the bench.
Wow.
They were wearing like North Face jackets on the bench.
Players.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't know how the hell we got talking about smoking. Dino Raja. It always goes back to Yugoslavia. Dino Raja. So James and Chris, go back to the Rockets,
Sure.
and then we'll talk about some other stuff. You know, it's fascinating to me how, and I hear this all the time from people from other teams saying, man, can you imagine if they lose in the second round? Can you imagine what
right.
it will be? And, you know, like, so Chris hasn't got out of the second round.
Right.
Fair.
We know that. Very well documented.
His playoff numbers are
incredible.
Insane.
They are insane.
And he's had, like, if you just look at things like just a completely forgettable Hornets Lakers series, and I think 2011 with like the end of the David West, Chris Paul Rocket.
Right.
Just the the Hornets are completely overmatched. And they go down 4-2, I think, in that series. It was 4-2. Had no business winning 2 games. It's all because of Chris Paul. Chris Paul went up like 35 and 10. Again, I don't have my laptop, but like 30 and 10. Incredible games. The epic Spurs Clippers series from 15, the year after the Spurs won the title. He hits the buzzer beater after coming out of the game with the hamstring injury to win game 7 of that series. Now, has he had horrible moments? The Oklahoma City meltdown in 2014.
Well, that's the defining one, isn't it?
But it's like it's a minute, right?
No, I get you.
It's a minute.
Hey, think about last year's Clippers. Last year, his numbers were incredible until Game 6, I think it was.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's the game they lost. So that's what everybody remembers. I mean, the world is cruel when it comes to this.
They had the meltdown against Houston. Okay, in 2016, where they're up 3-1 and they're up 19 going to the late in the third or whatever, and they lose. I'd have to go back and watch those games again to see how good or bad he was. Obviously, he wasn't good enough, but it's not as if he's just shrunk from the moment. You know, this is not the Toronto guys have shrunk from the moment in too many games. I don't think that's happened with Chris. And on the other side of that epic meltdown is James Harden.
Right.
People act like James Harden has done nothing in the playoffs.
I know it.
Because they had a bad exit against the Spurs last year, and then their second Dwight year they won 41, or the last Dwight year they won 41 and 41, lose to the Warriors. First of all, he made the finals.
I know, people forget that. And,
it doesn't count, I guess, because he was coming off the bench, but he was a monster against the Spurs in the conference finals.
People should go back and look at that film, and I did only because for the context of the Houston story that I did, because D'Antoni was talking about, we want to find that James, we're going to take that James Harden, and now obviously he's doing a lot more than that now, but that kind of movement and that kind of flow that they had, D'Antoni made James Harden sit down and watch it, just to remind him of it.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
So, like, I do, it's fair to poke holes in their playoff resume. That's life. It's fair. They've had bad moments. Chris especially has had some epic bad moments.
It just doesn't feel that way to me.
And some players are mentally tougher than others. I'm not saying James and Chris are not mentally tough. I'm saying the playoffs clearly take some getting used to for some big time star players.
It's true.
And for some players are give me the pressure. I love it. I'm fine. It's cool with me.
But even the ones that love the pressure, bring it on. Fine, we can name all the greats. Kobe,
they'll
LeBron,
have bad games too.
They'll have bad games, and you know what? They don't remember the times they win. They only remember the games they lose. That's true in almost every superstar I've ever interviewed talking about that. The relief of winning and the agony of losing. It's the agony of losing that stays with you, not the relief of winning, not the joy of winning.
I would think it would be the joy of winning.
No,
I don't understand. That's why I am who I am, I guess.
They bask in it, they enjoy it, and then 2 weeks later, they got to get out there and start going.
I think you wrote this in one of your books, isn't it? Well, after 86, doesn't Walton show up at Bird's
stays
house?
All night at Bird's house.
Can we just keep partying? That would be me.
Right.
Like, we won. I don't give a crap about next season. I don't care. But I just want to celebrate for like the whole summer.
But see, by then, Bird had already won 3. And he's like, man, I got to go to bed. I've got to get up because we got to try to win in 87. And Walton's just like, he had won in 77.
If I were an NBA player, or whatever player, baseball player, and we won the title, that whole offseason, I would come back so out of shape the next season. All I would do is celebrate. I would milk it for every bit it was worth. I'd sign every stupid endorsement deal that came to me because we won, and I would just party.
But that happens a lot. I mean, we've got plenty of evidence of that.
People, there was even some like, oh, look at the Warriors. They're partying for Steph's birthday. They're probably drinking. I'm like, yeah, no kidding.
Right.
They're young. It's their drink.
His 30th birthday. Absolutely. And there's a nice balance to that.
On my 30th birthday, the day after, me and 6 of my closest friends were supposed to go to Action Park, which is a famous water park in New Jersey. They call it Traction Park because so many people get injured there. It's one of my favorite places in the world. Guess what happened?
Not Urine Park?
No. Guess what happened? Yours truly, on the birthday boy, I had a little too much to drink. Action Park trip got canceled. Like an 8 a.m. groggy text message was sent. No Action Park trip, cannot get out of bed.
Oh, wow.
So that's what happens.
There you go. That's funny.
I will say, if they do lose in the second round or the first round, say they get the Kawhi Spurs in the first round, the Rockets have to make the conference finals if they're healthy.
I agree.
If they don't make the conference finals, it is an all-time catastrophe.
I agree with that, and I think they agree with that. More importantly,
and what's interesting about them,
they won't. None of them will make an excuse either.
Buying tickets for sporting events, concerts, comedy shows, Broadway plays, whatever it is. It used to be such a pain in the butt that it would almost be intimidating to me. How many sites do I have to visit to make sure I've got the whole secondary market on lock and I'm not missing a deal here or a deal there, or I'm not getting ripped off? Oh, I forgot to check that site. Let me go back. Suddenly 2 hours has gone by. SeatGeek takes those 2 hours and turns them into 2 minutes for any NBA game, any event that you want to go to. They collate all the secondary market sites into one place, so that whole searching, it's gone. They color code every deal with green and red dots and stuff, so you know, am I getting a good deal, a bad deal, an over market price, an under market price? Where is the seat? They have little handy maps you can use, so you don't have to click on every single seat to see exactly where it is. It's fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. It's easy, it's fast, and best of all, my listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase, and that can be a lot for a sports game or a concert or something, $20. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code LOWE, L-O-W-E, that's Lowe, my last name and the name of this podcast, L-O-W-E, and you get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. What's interesting about them, and I think there's a parallel to the Raptors, though I think the Rockets are better than the Raptors, is I think the Rockets are not only hungry, I think really for the first time maybe in Harden's Houston career, I think they feel it. Like, I think they feel like we got it. This is our year. Like, we're good enough. And I even think like they get punched in the mouth in game 1 of the Western Conference Finals. I don't think it's going to throw them off. I think they're like, we got it. They just have, sometimes you see a team, you're around a team, they kind of just have a different vibe. I think they got it.
Oh, I agree with you. And I saw it from the very first week I was there with them. And we all knew Clint Capella would be good. And we should have known how good because, I mean, the minute Chris Paul got there, you knew it was going to be Lob City. And he's made a huge difference for him. And, of course, we can't talk enough about Baumute or Tucker or Jeff Bzdelik, by the way. Jeff Bzdelik and the defensive system he put in for them. You can't talk enough about it. The reason they think we got it now is because they can stop people. They can stop people.
And they put these lineups on the floor now where it's like, I mean, I don't know if it'll be interesting to see how much they play Joe Johnson when it matters, but they put these lineups if they want of Chris, James, Luke, PJ Tucker, and Ariza, and it's like they switch everything, and they're big. They're all wings, but aside from Chris, they're pretty big and strong.
They are. And Jeff has convinced them that switching is okay. Not only okay, it's good, and that takes a mindset change a little bit. And they've all bought in. They really have. I really like their chances, and you know the Baumute numbers are hilarious. I think they're plus 11 points per 100 possessions better when he's on the floor, something crazy like that. And he's just a guy that does things right way.
He's a good NBA player. And the interesting thing about the Joe Johnson addition, he'll supersede.
That was a sneaky good move.
Yeah, and he'll supersede Gerald Green, who will not be reliable enough to play the playoffs on a game-to-game basis. Right. But it allows them to at least try to have the luxury of not having Baumute and Tucker on the floor at the same time for 1 million minutes and seeing if we can separate them a little bit more so we boost our shooting without losing some of the versatility.
Right.
And I'm not sure it's true, but they're going to try it. I'm with you. I think Houston has graduated out of the, if the Warriors take an injury, maybe category. I think Houston has graduated into, they have a chance.
Oh, they really do.
I don't think it's like a 40% chance or a 50% chance. Maybe it's a 20%, but they have a real chance.
And the other thing about Golden State, and it's always been there, and Steve Kerr knows it, they just get careless sometimes. They get careless, I don't know if it's emotionally careless or physically careless but the ball starts kind of wanging around a little bit. And this is a Houston team that will exploit that. And I think that's different than past years for sure.
Back to Bosh, because there's one thing I want to talk about. I do feel like some of the issues he talked about in that story are very personal to him. Excuse me. And between that and between DeMar, I talked to DeMar the other day to close up my Raptors column. And I said to him, look, that tweet, you're going to be like patient zero, ground zero, whatever, of like, this mental health stuff is just going to blow up now, and people are going to start.
Great.
And then the Kevin Love thing came out, and he just said, "Man, thank you. I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal. You sense the same thing, right? That this is now a tide that is not going to stop.
No, and I'm so glad because it's something that I feel like I've been writing about for a while. Maybe not quite with this urgency or with this laser focus, but it's an issue as old as time, not just obviously in the NBA, but in our society in general. I think it's 1 in 4 people suffer from either anxiety or depression. And with the NBA, you're talking about everything from ADHD all the way up to bipolar. And you're dealing with it all. And each one of those things have to be dealt differently. And the biggest thing that DeMar did was he took the first step towards destigmatizing it, because that's really all it's about. We have, in the NBA, all sorts of procedures in place and logistics and rules in place. If you tear your ACL, there is nothing specific for mental health. It's all looped into that drug policy. And
which is crazy because the drug policy is punitive.
Right.
The mental health policy cannot be punitive.
No, and they're going to change it. And I think we'll see some changes. And I bet we'll see them pretty soon, actually. I think things are coming. I think the Players Association and the league, in fairness to both of them, by the way, this is not a knee-jerk reaction to DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love. They've been talking about this for a while. I was disappointed it wasn't more spelled out in the last collective bargaining agreement because it's an old issue. But as we go forward, the owners have to be a little more progressive, and I think they are. I think about the turnover in owners we've had in ownership over the last 5 years. You've got younger, more progressive guys. You've got Steve Ballmer. You got Cuban. Of course, Jeannie Buss has taken over now with the Lakers. Those people, I think, are a little more progressive, a little more open-minded, perhaps, than some of the old school owners that were in place at one time. And so that's probably going to help the tide turn as well.
And it's like, why wouldn't the NBA player pool have the same percentage of people
higher
who are
think about it, because what if you talk about anxiety or depression, what exacerbates anxiety or depression? Sleep disruption. Are you kidding me?
It's part of the job.
Eating habits or not eating well. I think a lot of players that are stressed out in the NBA self-medicate by eating. Many of them, I think, self-medicate with, we've already heard, marijuana, more serious drugs. Alcohol, we know, is a big issue. And then there's the stress of being an athlete that's getting paid millions of dollars to perform. And if you don't perform, what happens? The stress of knowing, will they re-sign me? Is my contract up? Will I get traded? My wife told me if we move in another city, she's not coming with me. All these things, family situations. I'm making $15 million, but my family is sucking $12 million of it away from me. How am I going to pay my bills? Think about all those things. And no wonder we're not dealing with, of course we're dealing with something here.
And as you said, it's been going on for ages. I mean, you were telling me a story before about Sly Williams, right? It's a name I haven't thought about in a long time.
Yeah, me neither. And Sly Williams is on the Celtics, and he showed up, and McHale and Bird were like, oh my God, this guy's unbelievable. And Bird's like, we're going to win the championship. And then one day Sly Williams went to the dentist and never came back. He was dealing with, he was gone, and nobody talked about it. He was dealing with mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues. And I mean, there's a player, we've seen how many players now. Metta World Peace, very courageous what hit. I was there when he won that championship for the Lakers in Boston Garden, and him sitting up there on the podium talking about his mental health issues and how everybody in Indiana tried to help him and he wasn't ready, and how when it wasn't until he got to the Lakers. And you got to give Phil Jackson a lot of credit, because Phil Jackson helped him tremendously to have the courage to reach out and get help.
It's funny you bring him up, because everyone sort of decided to make a joke out of Phil Jackson's mindfulness and the yoga.
Yeah, that's a mistake.
All the players sort of whispering to each other, like, what are we doing? We're doing yoga here? Like, yeah, Phil, like all that stuff now, it's his version of sort of introspection and all that stuff. He was ahead
of his time.
It's not a joke. Like, that's something that kind of became a caricature. I'm sure I've made some Phil Jackson incense jokes or something. Like, we shouldn't joke about that. Like, that was a guy trying to do something right.
And he was way ahead of his time with regards to that. And, Metta World Peace, I think the problem with Metta was, the former Ron Artest, was that he was very, very open about it, but he was we all thought he was like the kooky uncle, right? Oh, he changed his name. I mean, if I'm getting help for my mental health issues, do I have to change my name? And, I think he was the face of mental health for a little while in the NBA, but it was a face that some of us didn't recognize. And I think that's why what DeMar has done and what Kevin Love has done is so much more powerful. And that's no knock on Metta World Peace. He had the courage to do it, and I'll never forget him sitting up there after having just won that championship. It's one of the most incredible moments I've ever seen, still to this day. It was amazing.
Thanking his therapist.
Yeah, thanking his therapist and thanking the Lakers and even thanking the Pacers and apologizing to them for the malice at the palace, the whole thing. It was a surreal moment. It really, you never thought that anything would be more compelling than Kobe Bryant in that setting.
Yeah.
But Meta's world peace really was.
No, he stole the.
He really did, and so, but yet for some reason we don't embrace him in the same way.
Listen up, everyone. We have a big favor to ask, and we promise it won't take up too much of your time. So I guess not that big a favor. You know, our show is supported by some fantastic sponsors. You know that. You hear me read all the ads for them. Well, we would love to hear your feedback. Head to ESPNpodcaststudy.com. That's ESPNpodcaststudy.com. And please fill out a short, anonymous survey, and that's it. We swear, there's nothing more. Again, ESPNpodcaststudy.com. Fill it out. Help us out. What did you learn? We're going to zip through a couple things before we let you go to your real job. What did you learn that most stuck with you being the first person that really got Kyrie to open up about the trade?
Well, Kyrie's difficult, you know. I knew him a little bit. I covered his dad. This is when it helps be really old. I covered his dad at BU, if you can believe that. And I had talked to Kyrie before on other stories. I'd done a story with him when his dad actually was in 9/11. His dad used to work at Cantor Fitzgerald.
That's right.
So wrote a pretty emotional story with him about that. When he came to Boston, he was so cheerful. Zach, you couldn't believe it. Different kid. So outgoing, so happy, smile on his face, talking about the traffic. I mean, I was like, wow, this kid is really feeling released. And so then when I got assigned the story, you know, you knew it was going to be kind of a difficult one. Kyrie's like, yeah, I just don't want to go. And I understood it completely. I'm not going to go down that road. But, you know, I had to continue my reporting. And as I did, I finally went to him and to his agent and said, listen, I understand you don't have anything to say, but I'm doing this story with or without you. We would certainly be a lot better.
It's amazing how that works sometimes.
Well, I mean, and what didn't mean it as a threat. It was just a fact.
But no, just not as a threat, but just the reality hits people that like this is coming out.
Yeah,
like,
it's coming.
I don't need you to do it.
Right, and I think once we got talking, I think like everything, it was a little cathartic to sort of talk about some of those things and to relive it. And I did think it was important because, you know, again, we talk about the narrative all the time. And the narrative was, oh man, Kyrie Irving, he's demanding a trade. He doesn't want to play with LeBron James anymore. What kind of idiot doesn't want to play with LeBron James anymore? All right, well, okay, but let's back up and realize they were exploring trade options for Kyrie Irving. So they were going to trade Kyrie Irving, or they were considering trading Kyrie Irving. I think that changes things quite a bit, don't you? And that part of it was never told. And I think in talking with Kyrie, sitting there with him, I could see the hurt on his face. That people can say what they want. Oh, he wanted more notoriety. He didn't like the fact that he wasn't an All-NBA player, that he wasn't, whatever. You can say all those things. And those all things can be true. But I know what I saw when I looked at him. And I saw a kid that wanted it, wanted things to be a certain way and didn't feel wanted there for whatever reason.
And I had Griff on my podcast at Sloan, and I asked him about all this. I asked him about the trade reports in your story, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but he essentially said, I mean, the fact that we talked about trading him, it didn't come out of the blue. Like, we knew he was unhappy.
Right, exactly.
Like, maybe
Griff was doing his job.
Yeah, maybe him hearing about that, and someday people will find out how he heard about it, was maybe the final straw, but like everyone knew he was on. I mean, you had teammates quoted in the story saying Kai was unhappy that whole year.
Yep.
He did. I reread the story today, and you did again something I've joked about, and Rachel has joked about, and even asked LeBron about in person. Rachel did. You had a line in there that some teammates said LeBron's tendency to call him the kid and something else annoyed him or something like that. So you actually found out like that it's not just us in the media kind of saying he seems to be needling him. Like Kyrie thought that too.
Sure he did. Yeah, and his friends did, and the people around him did. And that's what you got to remember too, is that Kyrie's pretty introspective in general, but there were a lot of people that cared about Kyrie. It's just the funny part for me was like LeBron, he saw me coming, and I was there. When I got there, nobody was going to talk to me. I mean, nobody. I was in Cleveland 3 days.
You wrote it in the story. It was clear that players had been told, do not talk to Jackie about this story.
Yeah, but they, you know what? This is what I like about players. They're independent enough and reasonable enough. There were a lot of people that really, really liked Kyrie Irving, and they wanted to express that, and they wanted to express it in a way that was fair to Kyrie. They didn't have to betray the Cleveland Cavaliers, but but LeBron, I said, you're not going to talk to me, are you? And he said, nope, and then I said, well, what about the idea that Kyrie didn't feel wanted here? Because that was the thing, and Does that make any sense? Or I don't. You probably remember. Again, I've already forgotten what I said, but he answered me. LeBron did, and I said to him, and he was, I think, surprised by it. And I really, we want to always make it black and white. It's never black and white. So LeBron, did he consider Kyrie his equal? No, of course not. LeBron doesn't consider anybody his equal. That's why he's LeBron.
Yeah.
Kyrie wanted to be considered at least on the same plane. It wasn't going to happen. Is it that simple? No. There's other things at work here. Okay? As long as Kyrie was in LeBron's shadow, all that stuff we talked about, being first All-NBA, second All-NBA, which, by the way, is what, as you know, qualifies you for the Supermax contract. So people are like, well, Kyrie's an idiot. He walked away from the Supermax. He was never going to get it as long as he was in Cleveland playing next to LeBron. So now Kyrie is what, I think he's in the top 10 of everybody's MVP voting, right?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, he's going to be, I think, an All-NBA player. I think he's earned it.
Boy, the guard spots are going to be
hard.
It's
always
you start
hard.
going through James and Steph and CP, who's missed 20 games probably, and then both the Toronto kids and all the kids, Lowry, DeRozan, Oladipo. I'm sure Russ. I mean, it's just going to be on and on.
Hard,
narrowing it to 6 is going to be.
It is,
brutal.
but I think Kyrie makes it this year. I do. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be splitting hairs. It's going to be, can you really differentiate between Kyrie and DeMar DeRozan? I mean, I don't,
they're very different, and they bring different things.
And Toronto is going to now finish 6-7 games ahead of this banged up Boston team, probably.
Yep,
I mean, to me,
fair.
it's not. It's a speaking.
Go ahead.
No, go.
I was just going to say, I think too, with the thing with Kyrie is all the things people said was, well, yeah, but he needs the ball and he's going to dominate the ball. I mean, that just hasn't happened. That just hasn't happened in my mind. Now, his assists are always going to be around what they are, 5.3 assists. But he has willingly shared the ball. He has been, by all accounts, in Boston. I haven't heard one negative word about him from those guys on that team. He is so happy to be there, and they are so happy to have him. And wait till he and Gordon Hayward get together.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think he gets a lot of the same kind of sets that Isaiah Thomas got, and his shot profile is different. There are more isolations, fewer pick and rolls, but you can in that system you can have the ball the most without having it all the time.
Exactly.
And I think we have the Wizards on tonight, and I have a piece on John Wall coming out on Countdown. I think that is the challenge John Wall is going to face coming back. Is the Wizards have been okay without him. They're not better without him.
No,
that's what the
silly.
Countdown pieces are.
But you got to get Porter some shots
but
now.
They're 12-8, and he's going to have to find a way to have the ball the most, but not have it all the time. Like if that means, you give it up like Tony Parker's been doing for 20 years and you run around and you get it back, and maybe as you're running around something else emerges for a teammate. Like the same transformation that Kyle and DeMar have gotten, have undergone in Toronto. Like they still get the most shots, they still have the most points, just not have the ball all the time. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how Washington navigates that. Very quickly, because we always have to come back to Boston, I guess. Have you seen the Ray Allen book excerpts?
I have seen them.
It's going to be an interesting book.
It is. It is. And, I always say this about Ray. Ray, they don't win that championship without Ray. I'm sad in a way that he's become this guy. I think this isn't going to play as well for him as he might think it will.
Oh, it's going to play badly.
Yeah.
Well, look, judging the excerpts are already playing badly. I don't know. The rest of the book could be about his family life or something. I have no idea.
So I think that's too bad because he hit one of the greatest shots of all time. Maybe the greatest shot. Some would argue one of the greatest shot. And remember now, he was taking that three-pointer with his heel up. He puts his heel down, he's out of bounds. The presence of mind to be able to go to the corner, catch that ball, know exactly where your feet are, and keep your heel up to beat the San Antonio Spurs, to me, is still just boggles my mind. They don't win in 2008 without him. It was never as good as people thought it was, but it's not as bad as it seems now. That's all I can tell you. I was there. You know, they and then maybe that's true of a lot of people, but he was never super close with those guys. Paul Pierce told me once a few years ago, the real big three was him, KG, and Sam Cassell. And that's just because Ray did his own thing. Ray spent more time with Danny and Doc playing golf with them than he did hanging out with his teammates. That's just where he was on. That doesn't make him a bad guy. He had the right to leave for Miami as a free agent because, remember we were just talking about Kyrie, they almost traded Ray Allen twice while he was there in Boston. So all of that is fine. The mistake everybody makes is you want all these guys to be best friends, and they're just not. It's just not how it is.
Had you heard the stories about Ray Rondo? Everyone knows that's been
it's just a train wreck.
It is a bad relationship. Yep. Ed, you heard the Ray KG, like one of the anecdotes was, like Ray would like to dribble in front of his locker in KG. So that's not how we do it here. We're not going to be able to do that.
Right.
And Ray
So
was
I
like,
never
you
heard,
don't get to tell me what to do. And
right.
blah, blah.
I never heard that specific story, but Paul used to tell me that one of the problems they had was their pregame routines were very different. Now, Ray is OCD, so he had this very specific routine. He got to the gym at a certain amount of time. He would shave his head. He would eat chicken and rice, the same meal every single time at the exact same time. He'd get all his shooting in hours before anybody was there. So by the time pregame came, like 5:36, he's done. He's loose. He's already done all his prep. KG comes in, and he's a bear. No one goes near him before the game. And then Paul, by the way, used to go back in the trainer's room and sit with Johnny Joe, who's one of their, their longtime guys. He would sit back there because he liked to be alone. So they all had their way of doing it. Ray's way of doing it leaked into KG's way of doing it because by the time we all came in, the media, Ray was like happy to talk, do whatever, because he was done. Well, KG was just getting started, and it drove him crazy. So I saw the two of them snap at each other in those situations. To me, this is kind of similar.
Well, and the one thing, the Ray sort of cold relationship with the Celtics after leaving for the Heat.
Yep. He was mad.
The one thing that I don't think has gotten enough play, and it reminded me because of something Rudy Gobert has said a couple times this season, is that, Hayward went dark on me during free agency, just wouldn't respond to my texts. Right. But by the way, it's a very stressful time. It's all kind of a natural.
And I think your agents tell you not to.
Yeah. This has been an unreported or underreported element of the Boston Ray thing. To his teammates, from their perspective at least, and from the Celtics organization's perspective, he did the same thing. Sure. He was unreachable. And during when he was being courted by the Heat, and then it's hard.
Well, you know what? The Heat get you in there, or any team gets you in there, and you don't get to talk to anybody or do anything or say anything until you sign. That's just how that always goes. And I think that in this case with Ray, I think there was a little bit on it, but I also think he was just ready to move on. They all gave up a lot. Ray gave up more than any of the other guys. That's the truth. To win that championship in 2008, Ray gave up the most. He absolutely did in terms of shots, minutes, all of that. He absolutely gave up the most, and I think he got tired of it.
The one thing in the book, and then we'll stop, that just doesn't pass the smell test to me. It'll be interesting to see once. It's sort of the excerpt sort of came out and didn't really make a eruption. People haven't been it, but he has a line in there about how Doc nixed a Chris Paul trade. They were going to trade Rondo for Chris Paul, and Doc nixed it because he couldn't do that to Monty Williams. He'd been a mentor to Monty Williams. Monty was the coach of the Hornets at the time. That just doesn't, Danny Ainge was the GM with full control of the team.
Right. One of the reasons Doc left for the Clippers.
And Danny is pretty unsentimental about. Danny ain't going to worry about
Danny Ainge traded KG and Paul Pierce. Are you kidding me?
He's not going to worry about how Monty Williams feels about it.
That trade makes no sense. I don't.
I think the Celtics would have loved to have gotten Chris Paul.
Well, of course they would have. But do you think that New Orleans would have taken at that point? Think about both of their careers. Was Rondo really at that level? That he's a straight up swap for Chris Paul? I don't think so.
Yeah, so that one doesn't pay. We'll see. Anyway, Jackie Mack, always a pleasure.
My pleasure is all mine.
We're gonna have. Are you back on the jump tomorrow?
I am. Are you?
Yeah, we're gonna be on the jump tomorrow. All right, and we'll
gang up on Rachel again.
Yeah, exactly. We'll carry the show again, and we will. I don't need to. When you write something, it will be a big deal. So we'll look forward to that. And
Thank you.
Always appreciate your time.
I enjoyed it. Thanks.